Elira never knew a mother's voice. She grew up in a small pack at the edge of the mountains, a pack that used to be strong but had fallen apart years before she was born. Her parents died when she was small, in a fight between packs that nobody talked about anymore. She was raised by her aunt, a quiet woman who worked hard and said little, in a house that always felt a little too empty and a little too cold. The other kids in the pack had families who trained them, fed them, and loved them out loud. Elira had none of that. She learned to fight by watching others. She learned to cook by trial and burnt fingers. She learned, most of all, how to be alone without falling apart. By the time she turned 20, she had grown into a young woman who kept her feelings locked behind a calm face. People in the pack whispered about her. They said she had no real family left. They said she carried bad blood, whatever that meant. They said she would never find a strong mate because she had nothing to offer. No title, no land, no pack magic passed down through generations. She heard all of it. She never let it show on her face. Then came the day her whole world changed, though not in the way she hoped. The elders of her small pack made a deal with a bigger, richer pack nearby, the Ashwood pack. It was called a peace bond. In simple words, it meant that Elira, one of the last women of her fallen pack, would be matched with the beta of Ashwood, a man named Kale. The elders said it would protect what was left of her people. They said it was an honor. Elira didn't feel honored. She felt like a piece being moved on a board she had no control over. She met Kale only once before the bonding ceremony, for a few minutes, in a hallway with too many people watching. He was tall, good-looking in the way people talk about at parties, with golden hair and a smile that seemed to know its own charm. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds and then looked away, like he had already made up his mind about her and didn't need any more information. That should have told her everything. But hope is a strange thing. It sneaks in even when you tell it not to. The night before the ceremony, Elira sat by her window and looked out at the mountains. Her aunt came and sat beside her, saying nothing at first. "You don't have to smile for them tomorrow," her aunt finally said. "Just stand tall. That's enough." Elira nodded, though inside, she felt like a small candle in a big wind, unsure if she would still be lit by morning. The day of the ceremony arrived with gray skies and cold air. The Ashwood Pack's hall was huge, built from dark wood and old stone, decorated with banners that showed their family symbol, a wolf howling at a full moon. Hundreds of people filled the room. Elira had never seen so many people gathered in one place, and every single one of them was a stranger to her. She stood at the center of the hall in a plain gray dress, her hands folded in front of her, her chin lifted only because she refused to let it drop. Across from her stood Kale, dressed in fine clothes, surrounded by friends who laughed a little too loudly at things that weren't jokes. The elder began the ceremony. Old words, old traditions, the kind of words that were supposed to bind two lives together forever. Then it was Kale's turn to speak the final words, the words that would seal the bond. He didn't speak them. Instead, he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a mistake. It was a laugh on purpose, meant to be heard by everyone in the room. "Her?" he said, turning to his friends like he wanted an audience for his joke. "I was told I'd get a mate with real blood, real standing, not some girl from a pack that doesn't even exist anymore." The room went quiet in that heavy way where everyone hears everything and pretends they didn't. Elira's hands stayed folded. Her face stayed calm, but something inside her chest cracked, quiet and small, like a window breaking in another room. Kale stepped closer to her, close enough that only she could hear his next words clearly. "I don't bond with strays," he said. "Go back to whatever's left of your people." Then he did something worse than the words. He turned his back on her, right there, in front of everyone. In their world, that gesture meant only one thing: total rejection, done publicly, done on purpose, done to embarrass her as much as possible. A few people gasped. Most just watched, the way people watch a car accident, unable to look away but also unwilling to help. Elira stood there in the middle of the hall, rejected in front of 300 strangers, and she did the only thing she had ever learned how to do in moments like this. She stayed still. She breathed. She refused to let her face show the storm underneath. Somewhere behind her, she heard her aunt's sharp breath, the only sound of comfort in that whole cold room. And then, just when Elira thought the worst moment of her life had already happened, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. They didn't creak. They didn't need to. The whole room seemed to feel the change in the air before anyone even turned to look. A man stood in the doorway, tall, calm, dressed simply but in a way that somehow made every fancy outfit in the room look like a costume. People around Elira straightened up without thinking, the way people do when someone important walks into a room, someone whose presence changes the air itself. Elira didn't know him, but she could tell, just from the way 300 people suddenly went silent, that this was not an ordinary guest. It was Dorian, the Alpha King. He ruled over all 9 major packs in the region, including Ashwood. He rarely showed up anywhere without warning, and he had definitely not been invited to this ceremony. He walked through the crowd like it wasn't there, his eyes moving past Kale completely, as if the beta was nothing more than a piece of furniture in his way. His gaze landed on Elira and stopped. For a moment, nobody in the hall breathed. He crossed the room, footsteps steady, and stopped in front of Kale. "Say that again," Dorian said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Something about the way he said it made the whole room feel colder. Kale's confident smile disappeared. "Alpha King, I didn't mean—" "You called her a stray," Dorian said, "in front of your pack, in front of mine." Kale opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time that day, he looked like a man who understood he had made a serious mistake. Dorian turned to Elira, and something shifted in his face, something the crowd wasn't used to seeing on their king. A kind of focus, almost gentleness, like he was seeing something the rest of the room had completely missed. "She's not yours to reject," Dorian said, not looking away from her. "She's mine to claim." The room erupted into whispers. Nobody had ever seen the Alpha King claim a mate in public, let alone one who had just been rejected in front of everyone. He reached out and took Elira's hand, not gently, not like he was asking permission, like a man picking up something he had already decided belonged to him. Kale tried one more time. "She has no pack magic, no title, no. She has mine now," Dorian said, still not looking at him. "That's the only thing that matters." The moment his hand closed around hers, something warm spread across her skin, right where his palm touched her wrist. It glowed faintly, gold and white, the mark of a real bond forming, not the fake, forced one that had just failed a few minutes earlier, but a true one, instant and undeniable. The whole hall watched a woman who had just been humiliated turn, in front of their eyes, into the claimed mate of the most powerful man in their world. Elira didn't cry. She had used up all her strength holding herself together through the first insult. She wasn't going to hand any more of that strength over now, not even to relief. She looked over at Kale one last time. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the floor, his golden confidence gone completely. Dorian's hand tightened slightly around hers, not for comfort, but almost like a promise, a signal that this was real and it wasn't going away. He led her out of the hall, past the pack that no longer mattered to her, out into the cold mountain air that, for the first time all day, didn't feel like rejection at all. That night, Elira didn't sleep. She sat by the window of the guest room she'd been given in Dorian's castle, wrapped in a thick blanket, trying to understand how her whole life had flipped in the space of 1 hour. A few hours ago she had been the girl nobody wanted. Now she was sitting in the private chambers of the most powerful man in the region, wearing his mark on her wrist, like a brand she hadn't asked for but somehow didn't want to erase either. She heard a knock at the door, soft, careful, nothing like the powerful presence that had walked into that hall earlier that day. "Come in," she said, surprised her voice came out steady. Dorian stepped inside, still dressed in his formal clothes from earlier, though he looked tired now, the kind of tired that comes from carrying responsibility every single day of your life. "You don't have to talk to me tonight if you don't want to," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." Elira studied him for a moment. "Why did you do that? Back there?" He was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding how much truth to give her, because what he did was wrong, and because— He paused, looking almost unsure of himself, which seemed strange for a man who ruled over 9 packs. Because the moment I saw you standing there, I knew. Knew what? That you were mine. That bond isn't something you choose, Alira. It chooses you. I felt it the second I walked into that hall. She wanted to say something sharp, something guarded, the kind of thing she always said when people got too close. But nothing came. Instead, she just looked down at the mark on her wrist, still faintly warm. I don't know how to be someone's mate, she admitted quietly, especially not a king's. Good, Dorian said. Because I don't want a mate who knows how to perform the role. I want one who's honest with me. That's rarer than any title. They sat together in silence after that, not needing to fill the space with more words. For the first time in years, Alira didn't feel like she had to hold her breath, waiting for the next insult to land. The weeks that followed were not simple. Being the mate of the Alpha King came with a tension Alira had never experienced before, most of it not kind. The nobles of his court whispered about her background, about her dead pack, about how she had no magic or title to bring to the match. Some were polite to her face and cruel behind her back. Others didn't even bother hiding their disapproval. Dorian noticed. He always noticed. And every time someone tried to make Alira feel small in his court, he made it clear, without needing to shout, that disrespecting her meant disrespecting him. But it wasn't Dorian's protection that changed things the most. It was Alira herself. She started attending council meetings, quietly at first, just observing. She began learning the history of the 9 packs, the politics between them, the old alliances and grudges that shaped everything Dorian dealt with daily. She asked questions nobody expected a stray to care about. She remembered details others forgot. Slowly, people who once dismissed her began to notice that she wasn't just standing beside the king. She was becoming someone the court actually needed. One evening, a messenger arrived from Ashwood Pack with urgent news. Kale, still smarting from his public humiliation, had been spreading rumors, trying to convince smaller packs that the Alpha King had broken tradition by claiming a mate with no pack standing. He was quietly building support against Dorian, using Alira as his excuse. When Dorian heard this, his calm expression didn't change, but something colder settled behind his eyes. "He's trying to use you to make himself look wronged," Dorian said, pacing his study. "Turn the story around. Make it seem like I stole something from him instead of correcting his mistake." Alira, sitting near the window, didn't look surprised. People like him always need someone else to blame. He rejected me in front of everyone. Now he needs a story where he's the victim instead of the one who caused it. Dorian looked at her, something like respect crossing his face. "You're not afraid of him." "I used to be afraid of a lot of things," she said. "Being invisible, being unwanted, being alone forever. He already gave me the worst thing he had. There's nothing left for him to threaten me with." Dorian crossed the room and sat beside her. "There's something I should tell you. Kale isn't just angry because of pride. Before the ceremony, he was supposed to inherit more land from Ashwood's council, land that depended on making a strong political match. When I claimed you, it wasn't just his ego that got hurt. It was his plans." Alira frowned. "So this was never really about me at all?" "No," Dorian said. "It never was. You were just the easiest target for his anger." That truth didn't erase the pain of that day, but it did something else. It made it smaller. Kale's cruelty hadn't been about her being unworthy. It had been about his own greed and fear of losing power. Understanding that lifted something heavy off her shoulders she hadn't realized she was still carrying. In the months that followed, Kale's plotting only got bolder. He tried to convince a few smaller, unhappy packs to challenge Dorian's authority, using Alira's background as proof that the Alpha King's judgment could no longer be trusted. He wasn't strong enough to challenge Dorian directly, so he worked in shadows, spreading doubt instead of open rebellion. Dorian called a full council meeting to address the growing rumors before they spread further. Alira, though nervous, insisted on attending. "If this is about me," she said, then I should be there when it's discussed. I'm done letting other people decide my worth in rooms I'm not allowed into. Dorian looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You've earned that seat. More than most people in this castle. The council hall was smaller than the ceremony hall from that fateful day, but it held just as much tension. Pack leaders from across the 9 territories sat around a long table, murmuring among themselves as Dorian and Alira entered together. Kale was there too, seated near the back, his golden charm replaced these days by a tight, nervous energy. Dorian didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've heard the rumors some of you have been listening to, he said, his voice carrying easily across the hall without needing to rise, that my claiming of my mate was reckless, that it threatens the stability of our packs. Murmurs rippled through the room. Let me be clear, Dorian continued. A bond isn't chosen by title or land. It's chosen by something none of us fully control. I didn't claim Alira because it was convenient. I claimed her because rejecting that bond would have been a lie, and I don't rule through lies. He looked directly at Kale as he said the next part. What happened in that hall wasn't my mistake to fix. It was his mistake to make. He humiliated a woman in front of hundreds of witnesses because his pride couldn't handle a match he didn't personally choose. That is not leadership. That is cruelty, wearing a crown it never earned. Kale's face reddened, but he said nothing, unable to argue with what half the room had already witnessed themselves. One of the older pack leaders, a woman known for rarely speaking unless necessary, finally broke the silence. The Alpha King speaks the truth. I was in that hall. I saw what Kale did. This council should be questioning his judgment, not the king's. Slowly, one by one, other leaders nodded in agreement. The tide that Kale had been trying to build against Dorian began to crumble under the weight of witnesses who remembered exactly what had happened that day. By the end of the meeting, instead of weakening Dorian's authority, Kale had only succeeded in exposing his own bitterness to the entire council. His standing, already shaky since the ceremony, took another hard hit. After the meeting ended and the hall emptied, Alira stood by the window, watching the mountains outside, the same mountains she used to look at back home before everything changed. Dorian came to stand beside her. You didn't say much in there. I didn't need to, she said. You said everything that needed saying. Some people in that room still don't think you belong here, he said carefully. It might take time before that changes completely. Alira turned to look at him. I've spent my whole life being told I don't belong somewhere. First in my old pack, for having no strong family left. Then in that ceremony hall, for having nothing to offer a beta who never wanted me anyway. She paused. I'm done waiting for permission to belong. I decide that now, not them. Something in Dorian's expression softened, a kind of quiet pride that went deeper than politics or council meetings. That's exactly why the bond chose you, he said. Not because you have magic or land, because you have something rarer. You don't break, no matter how many times people try to make you feel small. Over time, the whispers in Dorian's court quieted, not because everyone suddenly loved Alira, but because she gave them fewer and fewer reasons to doubt her. She learned the customs of the court quickly. She treated everyone, from the highest noble to the lowest servant, with the same fairness she had always wished someone had shown her. Slowly, that fairness earned her something rejection and cruelty never could: genuine respect. As for Kale, his influence within Ashwood Pack weakened steadily. Without the political marriage he'd been counting on, and with his reputation damaged in front of the full council, the elders of his own pack began questioning his ability to lead. Some say he eventually left Ashwood territory altogether, moving to a smaller pack far from the mountains, trying to start over somewhere his name didn't carry the weight of that humiliating day. Alira never celebrated his downfall. She didn't need to. She had already moved on to a life he could no longer touch. One evening, almost a year after the ceremony that had once broken her in front of hundreds of strangers, Alira stood at the same window in Dorian's castle where she'd first sat, unsure if she belonged there at all. This time, she wasn't alone with her thoughts. Dorian stood beside her, his hand resting over the mark on her wrist, the one that still occasionally glowed faintly gold and white when either of them felt something strong enough to stir it. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The ceremony?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not the way I used to. I used to remember the humiliation. Now I mostly remember the moment right after, when those doors opened." Dorian smiled slightly, an expression that had become rarer and more genuine the longer they'd been together, no longer performed for a watching court, just real. "I remember it too, the second I saw you standing there, refusing to fall apart even after everything he said. I knew right then you were stronger than anyone in that entire hall understood." Alira leaned into him, finally letting herself feel the weight lift completely, the last traces of that old cruel word, stray, dissolving into something that no longer had any power over her at all. "I'm not a stray," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "No," Dorian agreed, pulling her closer. "You never were. You were just waiting for the right person to see you clearly." Outside, the mountains stood the same as they always had, quiet and unmoved by the changes below. But inside that castle, a woman who had once been rejected in front of hundreds of strangers now stood as the truest, most respected mate a king had ever claimed, not because of magic, not because of land, but because she had never once stopped being exactly who she was, even when the whole world tried to convince her that wasn't enough. And in the end, that turned out to be more than enough. It turned out to be everything,